Today's session is all about being human in business. This means prioritizing mental health as an employer and as an employee. If you're not sure what this looks like, CMHA is here to help. CMHA at Work team provides support, services for people dealing and living with mental illness who are unemployed or underemployed. And this is done on an individual basis. No two clients are the same. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of CMHA, Karn Nichols, and Work Insights founder, Michael DeVenney.
Thanks, Tracy. That was great. It's my great pleasure today to be hanging with Michael for lunch. And Michael DeVenney, as many of you know, some of you may not know, is an entrepreneur and a mental health advocate. And he's dedicated to opening minds and creating change through the work that he does. And he's also a dear friend and a wonderful ally to CMHA-Nova Scotia. Michael speaks regularly to diverse audiences about his personal and professional mental health journey with a focus on recovery and hope and the importance of prioritizing mental well-being in the workplace, which is why we're here today. He's also the founder of Work Insights, which is a Halifax-based consulting firm focused on the intersection between entrepreneurship and wellness. So he's the perfect person to have here today. So today I'm looking forward to hanging with Michael and exploring the world of work relative to our mental wellness. And this is really a topic that's become way more prevalent over the past couple of years as those boundaries between work and home have really blurred. And we're not sure where one starts and the other stops. So it's a great conversation to have at this point in time. And also because some of us are returning back to the workplace and what's shifted because of that. So Michael's going to start with a short presentation, and then from there we're going to roll into what we're calling a fireside chat, which is, you know, basically some questions and answers and banter around our thoughts around these things. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Michael and take it away.
Thanks, Karn, and thanks, Tracy, and thanks everyone for attending. And I think one of the reasons you like bringing me on is I don't have a lot of filters, so
Exactly.
I'm very open to saying what I think should be said, which is not something I did in the past. I think the biggest thing that struck me even today was there is actually a poll on LinkedIn this morning about whether or not organizations should play a role in mental health. And I was struck by the fact that it was even a question. There should be no question. Organizations do play a part in our mental health. I think to a great extent, our work has become our community. In the past, there's been a saying that, you know, work is the new religion, and that was a way a lot of people found community, and that is what I think we do with work now. Working remotely has certainly changed how we can connect with each other. And I think we don't feel the same sense of belonging that we used to in terms of work being that community for us. And right now, what I've seen and certainly seen in the literature is that work is now triggering so many mental health challenges for people, from anxiety to more and more trauma. All of us carry things from our childhood. Some of us carry some very deep things from our past, and we never know what will trigger that. And in the last few years, we've of course had such a shift to the way our world works that now we're getting more triggered and people aren't quite knowing what's happening and how it's happening. So I think there shouldn't even be a question of should organizations be involved in mental health. I think the question is how they should be involved. And that's really the big conversation for today. Everyone knows me, and I always have a slide deck. So if Aaron, if you can put that up, I'll just run through us a little bit of background and we can chat. There we go.
Sorry, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
We're good.
So I just don't have control. So that's what I'm always looking for, is control. What I'll do is just talk through it. So we're talking about really this new working environment that we have and how it is impacting us. And I'll just keep saying, if you want to slip the slide. So right now, the number's inching up a little bit, but 25% of Canadians typically experience some type of mental health illness each year. The pandemic has increased that incident rate to over 40%. That means that more and more people are now being diagnosed and recognizing the mental health challenges that they're facing. And what we're seeing on the next slide is that this is something that organizations have to play a part in. Like I said, there is no question. We used to see it as an individual's responsibility. If they have any type of challenge personally, that's something they should take care of on their own. That's not the case. Organizations are where, again, we find that sense of community and belonging to a great extent. So it really isn't a question. Organizations really have to be involved. And on the next slide, what we're talking about is the fact that there's a challenge here. And that challenge is one word, and that's stigma. 80% of employees in studies feel that there's stigma in the organizations, and they feel that only 23% of leaders are doing anything about it. At the same time, leaders acknowledge it. They do feel that 75% are saying they acknowledge that the stigma is there. So there's no disagreement, there's no misunderstanding, there's nothing being lost here. We all know there's stigma in the organization, and that's why we're being triggered so much. And on the next slide, what we look at is what stigma actually is this level of shame or prejudice, discrimination towards people with mental health conditions. One of the really different aspects of stigma is that a lot of times there's self-stigma, that most of us who have any type of deep-seated mental illness, we carry an incredible amount of shame about it. I've spent a lot of time in therapy, and I still feel so much of what goes on with me is my fault. And that does not help when I feel stigma in the organization around me. It also means that people with mental illnesses are viewed differently. And I've heard that so many times in the different working environments that I've been in. It's nothing like having diabetes that people can talk about it openly, that, I know what people would say about me. They even had something with when I had another company, my receptionist told me after that we always had a heads up that what mood was I in when I came through the door. And that meant that people felt that they had to respond to whatever mood I was in, which really bothered me. It also affects all their interpersonal interactions. We don't feel included. We're not feeling like we can talk about where we're at, so that automatically puts us back. What it definitely hits on is that access to projects and promotions. And I heard again just the other day from a company that I have a lot of respect for, that someone was being overlooked for a promotion because the feeling was they were having too many challenges with anxiety, that they didn't feel that that person would be able to do the job, which I don't think, that's just not fair at all. So there's just so much stigma out there. And going to the next slide, one of the reasons that we hold back because of that stigma is that a lot of us think that if people know about what's behind us, they'll think we're worthless. If they understand what we're going through, they're going to doubt if we have the talent or the skills to contribute. And if they understand what we're experiencing, they're going to doubt my character, our character. So this is what's going on in our heads at the same time as we're experiencing some real challenges. So this environment does not help. On the next slide, there's just a small story called Flaming Axis, that when I worked in one of the past businesses I had, there was such a performance anxiety that you just simply had to be contributing all the time, and you had to keep up. My feeling was that when I started working, I had to cover up my past, and by doing so, I needed to work and work hard. So people would focus on how much I contributed, not who I was and what was behind me. So one morning when I was 32, I actually thought I had a heart attack, fell on the floor. And when people came to see what was wrong with me, I said, like, I still have to get a report. They asked if I wanted to go to the hospital. I said, no, I need to get a report done. That proposal has to be finished. So my mind was on getting that proposal done. That's what was there. And my business partner at the time ran and he goes, like, are you all right? He said, you having a heart attack? And I said, I don't know. I said, I think I might be. And he said, did you get that proposal done? I said, so like, it's just reinforced all the time. And like, there was nothing intentional, but that's what's there. So I always felt like I was trying to juggle flaming axes, that all the time I was trying to work and contribute and perform, and not perform like other people. I just had to contribute more. I had to put in 60, 70 hours a week to show that I was worth it. And in doing so, it put so much pressure on me. And on the next slide, I'm sure that so many people go through similar things. The concerns that we feel about stigma in the workplace are well-founded. A study by McKinsey earlier this year just was mind-boggling to me, that 73% of employees will choose not to work with a colleague living with a mental illness. That means that those of us who actually are experiencing mental illness don't want to work with other people like us, which is just incredible to me. And 55% of employees will choose not to work with a colleague recovering from a mental illness. So there's an enormous amount of stigma that is out there. And that's what we're trying to work with at a time when we're at our most vulnerable. On the next slide, we talk about when you leave stigma alone, when we simply let it stay there, which is what we've done, it transitions very quickly to discrimination. People do not feel they can talk about what is happening to them. And that discrimination then translates really quickly to a lack of access and unequal services and support. So we're nervous about asking for what we need. When I did one presentation, someone said that they have an office for mental health support, but they said it was an office in the center of the overall organization. So anybody who walked into that office, everybody knew. So no one walked into the office. So again, we keep doing things that really put the sign on us. And it takes so much courage to talk about mental illness, and it shouldn't. It's something that we all go through, we all experience. It's very natural. On the next slide, I'll give you a little bit of a story about the wall. So the wall is something I built around me, and that comes from my past. So many of us have something from our childhood that we carry. And I've learned over the years that, never ever judge anybody, because you never know what they're carrying. So for me, I grew up in a household where both my parents worked, and they were really involved in the work. So I was not really connected with them. Unfortunately, what that opened was an opportunity for someone to take advantage of that. And I was molested for over 3 years, from age 7 to 10. I never told anybody. In fact, I thought it was my fault, and I couldn't ever share this with them, or they would think there was something wrong with me. So I allowed this person to torture me. In fact, I just did it again. I said, I allowed. I was in a circumstance where someone did that. When it stopped, and I still never forget what was said to me when it was ended, I started high school. At that time, I had learned to look down, and I had learned not to look people in the eyes because I didn't want them to see what was there. So that opened up 6 years of bullying from so many different people. And what I learned there was that you just can't trust anybody. So I always simply held everything in. I never responded, and I never told my story. I thought they all knew. And what I found out later, of course, in life is that they never knew. So I held all this in. I held back who I was. I carried this incredible shame of what had been done to me. And that affected how I moved into the workforce and how I've lived my life. To a great extent, I hid who I was for almost 30 years now. It was only a few years ago that I actually hit the wall and everything just fell apart. And when I look back now, I always call it the Great Depression. But 7 years ago, I just couldn't handle it. It just all came out. And to be honest, it was the single best thing that ever happened to me. So instead of just trying to survive life, what I've done in the last 7 years is try to actually live life and enjoy it. What I also did was a study on, I am an analyst, so of course I love numbers. So I needed to know, was I alone? Was this just me? And what I quickly found out that I was far from alone. 23% of men have been abused as children. More than 40% of women have been abused. So we all carry so much with us. Being able to talk about it is really challenging, but this is why I actually speak. This is why I write every week. I want this to be a conversation that we can have, that people don't pull back and don't know what to say. I think one of the biggest things I always tell people is, I'm not looking for you to fix me. I'm not looking for you to save me. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from, and that you understand, what's going on with me, and we can connect from there. So that's where I'm at. So I actually live with complex PTSD. I recognize that it's something that I will have for the rest of my life, but I am not going to let it define me or put me in a box that I can't contribute and do what I want. So of course, what did I do? I started a new company. I looked at ways that we can move this into the workplace, that we become more aware of how to help people. And I will tell the story as many times as I'm allowed, because I think it opens up the platform for all of us to share where we are. That was more than a short story, but I wanted you to get some context from where I'm at. So the next slide will show, where do we go from here? What is the opportunity for leaders in the workplace? On the next slide, there's one thing overall that we can do, and that's provide a place of psychological safety. So that's where people have a healthy environment where they can contribute their best. So how are we doing with that? So the data that we've seen, I've shown on the next slide, which is showing that overall, we do okay in some areas. In terms of giving people room to learn and grow, we do quite well there, but we don't do very well at recognizing the unique talents and skills that people bring. We don't do very well at enabling people to make mistakes and not, blame them for it. And we certainly don't do well at letting people take risks. So those things are creating an environment where we're questioning ourselves. We're wondering if we can do things. It really hits our ability to test and try new things. So have we done well at creating an environment of psychological safety? On the next slide, what I show is the difference of perspective. So employers, 65% believe that they support a mentally healthy environment. 51% of all employees agree, but only 27% of frontline employees do. Employers see mental health as a priority. Only 31% place it as a priority. Employees that have challenges accessing care, almost 2/3. So there's a huge problem that we're simply not setting as a priority. And have employers addressed mental health? Only 23% have. And do employees see ways to do so? Almost 80%. So we're on two different sides, and we need to reconnect and come together and close that gap. On the next slide, talking about the shift that a leader can make, and moving on to the next slide, what we can do more than anything else is we've got this opportunity to shape culture to support healthy working environments. 79% of employees feel that awareness campaigns would reduce stigma. Simply talking about it. So the one simple thing that every leader can do is to open the conversation and make it natural. What I'll add here as well is that I think what is most important for leaders is to share that they too experience anxiety. They too have challenges that they're facing. You can have the most robust benefit and support plan possible, but if leaders themselves do not share that they too experience mental health challenges, no one else will do so, because we all look to leaders to set and model the example. And I am not saying that you overshare and use your workforce as therapists. What I'm saying is simple things like, I too feel anxiety when I face this, or I too have had times when I question where I'm going with things. With the new company I have, I share very openly what my days are like and where I'm at. And what that has done is made the most incredible working environment I've ever had. And I never wanted someone to ever feel that they'd done something wrong because of the way I am. And there are definitely days that I am not in the best place. And when I let the team know that, they know how to respond. The greatest thing that happened in my mind is in one of our team meetings, someone brought up that they'd been diagnosed with ADHD. And we had this incredible chat about it because someone else said, I've got it as well. So what are you doing? Like, what are you taking? How are you handling it? And I thought, no way would this ever have happened in any other place that I had worked. The fact that we could have these conversations and that these two team members talk to each other outside of work about comparing how things are going, it's incredible to me. So that, I think, was probably one of my proudest moments, was looking at, we've got this environment where we can talk about, unfortunately at times, we can't talk about everything. So everyone else is also 30 years old, so it also means that they're quite open to question me about almost anything. So, but I find that's just so much better. On the next slide, what does that look like? The strategies, and there's a number here which I'll just run through, but the biggest thing is to shift that perception of what mental illness and addiction are. I'm also an addict, which I don't talk about a lot, but I'm addicted to a prescription medication that I cannot get off. CNN actually did an expose of this. It's one of the 3 most dangerous medications still used in the world, and I've been on it for 14 years. So to get off it's going to be incredibly difficult. So talking about it as well is something that I think I need to do more of, because I think we're medicated far too quickly. Another strategy that we can follow on the next slide is to eliminate discriminatory behavior, to be very aware of what creates psychological safety, to understand how that impacts people in terms of their mental health, and to make sure that that's not there. The next strategy is to ensure that there's parity of benefits. We don't do very well at providing benefits for people in terms of accessing mental health. We are getting better, there's no question, but we really have to provide better care for people, because if we're not mentally healthy, we're not physically healthy, we're not able to bring our best contribution. So it's really important. And the last strategy is something that I think is really key. There needs to be a senior executive responsible for it. You cannot delegate this to somebody else in the organization. Only 35% of companies have an executive responsible for mental health. So we need to move a lot further on this one. So what can you take away as a conclusion from this? And I probably talked a lot longer than I should have. So on the next slide, there's just a few things that I think are important. I think the first thing is to make sure you're safe yourself. And I think my advice to people is always find a therapist or counselor first. You feel understood. I think it's really important to find a community group. One of the things that really helped me was joining this one community group, because it's the first time I understood that there were other people like me out there. Going to an individual therapist has been so good for me, but going into a community group where I could see that other people experienced like I did, I actually felt really connected. And invest in your well-being. That is the biggest thing you can do. That gives you some grounding. And the last thing I'll say is that, the biggest thing we can do in companies on the next slide is to really eliminate stigma. It's the biggest issue we have. And the more we can go from awareness to action to accountability, that's what's going to make a change. And that really, to a great extent, starts with having conversations. And I think that's what Karn and I are going to do right now. So that's a background, and I am open for any question you possibly could have. If you're off mute, I'm open to any question you have.
You'd think after 2 years I would have figured out the system, hey? Yeah, I think the first thing I want to say, Michael, is just thank you. I know that by showing up with your story and the authentic way that you present it, what I love about it is it just gives everyone who hears it permission and courage to do the same. And then that it has like an effect on the rest of society. And I really believe, like, what I'm really appreciating about these sessions that we're doing this week for Mental Health Week is the fact that we are having these great conversations with people who are living with mental illness and managing their mental wellness in different ways. And their stories are touching all of us in a way that we can say, hey, wait a minute, you know, that's me too. And maybe I can make this work instead of feeling so alone. And so thank you for that, because I think it goes a long way into supporting that destigmatization that you were talking about too. And I think that's really super important. So for those of you who may not know, my background is in human resources. So this is an area that's near and dear to my heart, because I think, you know, business in general is about people at its core. You know, it's not about business, it's about people. And what I'm super curious about, though, what your thoughts are on in this regard, is that as leaders within organizations, there's this sort of external force that says we have to be productive, we have to, you know, manage that bottom line. And then what we're talking about is that human element. Like, how can we manage with humanity every day? And so what I'm really curious about is, you know, what's your advice to leaders and how you can kind of bridge that gap in a way that honors sort of both of those things? I think that's a big question.
Yeah, and I've got a very trite answer.
I thought you might.
Like, step up and lighten up. I think so many leaders, particularly where we are right now, because the general age, let's say, of leaders are in a certain range, and they've mainly been promoted for performance. That's something they're very comfortable with. I spoke to a room of CEOs a few months ago, many of whom I know quite well, and I'm looking around the room, and they're all uncomfortable. I'm thinking, I know at least half of you are on some type of anti-anxiety, antidepressant. Like, we're all there. So why are you so afraid to talk about it?
Right.
And I think, you know, we build this armor that helps us move through the company, move through the organization, move into these positions of leadership. But we've got a new social contract now. Like, there's many things that the pandemic did, but it did establish a new social contract with employees. And we used to talk about the war for talent. Well, talent won. So there's no war. And what we're looking at now is we do want a more human way of working. And that's not only just in terms of flexibility and working on a hybrid or remote basis, it's being able to feel like you can be yourself, like there's a sense of belonging. Yeah. And leaders think they're helping by portraying this image of like infallibility, of strength. What I've heard more and more is that the more I share about where I am, the stronger people think I am, which always strikes me really funny, because that's not what I thought originally.
Interesting.
You get these comments about like courageous and all these things, which, you know, I don't necessarily go with, but I don't think it should be courageous to be human. Like, I think it should just be something that we do. So I think leaders right now, so I give really long answers, as you know, Karn. Like, I think the real answer for that one is, I think leaders have to put a new lens on. It's just like, some of us as we age have to wear bifocals. Well, I think, you know, as we take on the leadership role, we have to put on the bifocals that, yes, we are in business and we are responsible for moving a company forward or moving an organization forward. But there should be a lens in terms of how we're treating each other as people. And if we're not creating that environment of psychological safety, there will be no trust. People will leave. There will be no engagement. We already know what happens. So that's where I think, you know, we can't ignore it. We simply have to really put that lens on and be aware of it.
Yeah, I think so. Mara's noted in the comments, and I would really agree. And that is just being more comfortable in being vulnerable, and you know, as you were saying, you know, showing up as someone who is as human as everyone else in the organization. and that gives everyone permission to feel, you know, the other theme that I think came from your research and the things you were speaking of, and it resonates with me a lot in the work we do, is really about creating safe places for people to show up as the best version of themselves, and so that impacts, you know, innovation and creativity and all of those wonderful things that actually is a wonderful payoff for that vulnerability that's showing up.
Yeah, I saw something just last week that said people are now starting to connect with the job they're doing, not with the organization they're working with. So that means we really just focus on the work that we're doing. We're no longer actually part of the community and connected with other people that we work with. And that's a really sad movement. And this is where I would say leaders have, in the last few years, there's been a few things on leaders' plates. And protecting the physical health of people have been, you know, probably the biggest issue. And now we're moving into this phase of how do we get back to normal? There is no normal. There's no going back to anything. I think we've got a great opportunity to go ahead. And if we're worried about people now really just taking jobs, well, we should provide them with a community that they feel they belong to. And that is about being vulnerable, being open. The greatest, so there's 3 leadership skills that people are looking for going forward. You know, one is sense making. So what does this all mean? One is, you know, forward looking. So you're looking ahead to see what's there. The third one is the big one, which is empathy, that you actually care about the people that work with you. And that's where I think we need to spend some more time.
That's really cool, because that's the theme for Mental Health Week. So that was a nice little plug for us there. Thanks. So how do leaders and organizations and the systems within those organizations nurture empathy?
I always like to use, well, so I like to talk about myself, so I use myself as an example.
Okay.
I think I absolutely sucked as a manager, as a leader in the past. I think I was horrible to work for. Very much into the command and control and talent and sell type of mentality. And there's still leftovers of that inside of me that, you know, I really want to get to the performance. And there is something that came up in the last few weeks, and I thought, okay, my approach is, okay, like, I'm going to be firm about this. I'm going to come in. I'm going to say, this is what needs to be done. This is what we have to do. And I did what I do every day. I would always go for a hike. I try to get out for 10 kilometers a day. And on that 10 kilometers, I usually whiteboard all kinds of things in my mind and think about all kinds of stuff. But I thought, if I come in that way, how is that going to help? Like, how is that going to start everyone's week? How is that going to get us forward? So over the walk, I completely changed how I was going to approach the week. And I would say that was empathy in action, because when I thought about what they were going through, what they were experiencing, it made me change things around. I think the one single way that we can put empathy into action is understanding to ask questions first and listen. We're so tempted as leaders to tell that we feel we need to have the answer. We don't. I think the greatest skill that we can perfect as leaders is knowing how to ask questions and listen, because that way you find out where people are.
Yeah, it seems to me that there are a couple of things are coming out of this conversation that are sort of resonating for me. One is, and you referred to this earlier on, but just changing that whole paradigm around what does success look like for leadership, right? And it's not the bottom line. It's the engagement, you know, of the team and the safety that they feel within that organization, and the rest will pay dividends, is what I hear you say.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, I would want to be remembered for what I achieved.
Yeah.
And that was really the focus of everything I did. All my life was focused on work. no relationships, no friendships. I just focused on what could I achieve. And that left me in a pretty cold and lonely place. I really look now at, what are the things that I can do that are going to provide a positive impact for people. And that doesn't mean we don't have a profitable company that's growing. We're just going to do it in a different way. And just kind of going back to that, using empathy as opposed to the firm hand, we had spectacular conversations out of that approach. And I thought, from empathy, I saw people respond exactly how I wanted them to and hoped they would. If I had gone in with, here's what we're going to do, it would have went nowhere. I actually would have disengaged them. I would have dismissed them. It would have done nothing. So I think for all of us, it's taking that little breath and pause in our mind as to, okay, let's just get grounded here. Let's accept where we are. And what questions can I ask that will help us move forward?
One of the other themes you spoke of, and we speak about it a lot, I know, when we're chatting, because I think there, for you and me anyway, there's this sort of belief that that stigma is the underpinning of a lot of what's wrong in society, obviously, and but in business as well. And so in your mind, I mean, you've named a few in your presentation, but one of the things I'd love to sort of walk away with if I were participating in this sort of discussion would be, what are the ways that we can begin to reduce the stigma that's within organizations? What are things that leaders can do?
I think the biggest thing we can do is humanize it and make it natural. That, again, like one of the fundamental things we want as people is to feel connected with somebody, to feel like we belong. Don't want to be fixed, don't want to have, those types of things done. But I think if we can provide an environment where we understand that mental health is actually health. It's not something separate, although government treats it that way, just to get that shot in there. But I think it's looking at, we're all in this continuum, we're all on a journey. Every one of us can be triggered into anxiety, into depression, into burning out. And so I think we really have to just, as Mara said way back at the beginning, to be more vulnerable. I think conversation is the single best way to start taking down stigma. So if senior executives could actually have this conversation, a guided conversation on mental health, and open up about it, and then start sharing that with the people who report to them, the managers, the directors, and then move that throughout the company. I think that's important. I think what's also really important is that when someone comes to you, they're not looking for you to be their therapist. So as a manager, as a leader, the question is not, what type of help are you going to provide for them? What they're looking for is to be heard. And I think all that really needs to be done is to listen, to validate what you heard, stop that need to fix or provide solutions, and actually ask them, what do you think is the next step for you? And that to me makes a big difference. We talked once about, a lot of times someone who's going through a real challenge to their mental health, they often know what they should do. A lot of times they just need to be able to say it, and to hear someone go, yeah, I think that's a good help. Yeah. So I just don't think we need to worry about jumping to become mental health experts. That's not the approach at all. It's actually just to become more human, to let the guard down, and to listen, to ask questions, to confirm, and to kind of validate where people are and what's next for them.
Yeah. How hard can that be, right?
It shouldn't be
Being
that
human, I
hard.
mean.
Yeah, it seems to be the toughest thing we have. Like
Yeah.
I find, and like, so when I said when I came out big time. So I finally spoke about everything that happened to me as a child. I had suppressed the fact that I was gay my entire life, so I came out as well. So there's nothing more that anybody needs to ask about me. I've already told it all. And I never had to worry about what should I say, what shouldn't I say. I'm just going to say it. And what I have found is how people respond is really interesting. My therapist said I use that term too much. That's really interesting, but that's because I'm an analyst. Everything's interesting. There's people who will pull back, and I found that really hurts and still does. But I understand now that a lot of times people will pull back because it's too close. So it's not personal. It's just that you might have come too close to something.
They're on their journey as well, right?
They're on their journey.
Yeah.
And there could be someone that can't respond because they just don't know how to. Like they're struggling with how do they best respond.
Mm-hmm.
And some people lean in, and then there's the bunch that, excuse me, that are just assholes. They're out there, and it's just understanding that some people are never going to relate to you.
Right.
And you need to recognize that and not try. I definitely worked with somebody who I kept trying to connect, and they're not going to. So the best thing I can do is stop and move on.
Yeah. It all comes down to being human, doesn't it? And you know, as you say, it is so simple, but I think, you know, society has just taught us to build these walls and really lose connection with that humanity. And it's so important to really open up our hearts and communicate in a way that gives other people permission to communicate and feel safe in doing that as well.
And I think like one thing I would mention too is that I have not lost any because of being open about my mental health and my background.
Yeah.
In fact, I believe I've actually had more work come to me because, I mean, I write about it. As you know, I write every week on LinkedIn, just stream of consciousness about what's going on. I worried initially about what would that do for the business. It hasn't done anything other than I think it's actually made people a little bit more connected to me.
Yeah.
So I don't, I'm not saying that you have to share everything at work. I don't think you should actually. But I think we need to be able to have a conversation at a certain level, like you said, just being human. But also just being aware of, we're not there for therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where the line is.
Yeah.
What do you so this whole notion about being human, what do you anticipate or what do you observe that business owners or leaders or individuals in teams would feel would be the biggest obstacle to leaning into that in a way that's going to actually make a difference?
Without a doubt, it's fear. It's fear of how people will respond. Like what's going to hold people back is what's holding them back now is that I'm afraid of how you will perceive me, that you will see me as weak, that you'll see me as not of value, all those things. So this is where I do believe that leaders have to start the conversation first, because they have a certain level of authority based on where they are. So with that authority comes responsibility. So I think if I see that a senior leader can talk openly about where they are, that will take a lot of the fear away from being able to talk about where I am. And the more we provide, one of the things we found, as you know, when we did the research on mental health in Nova Scotia, is that one of the biggest challenges is that most people don't have any idea where to start.
Yeah.
like just do not know where to go for their mental health. And I think one of the things that companies can do is provide a really clear like map. Here's the benefits we have. Here's where you can go for help. These are the type of organizations we have around you.
Yeah.
Like if companies were actually aware of the community groups that were available to people, to me, like that in itself would be an incredible help.
Yeah.
I just stumbled on this one group, and it was never something that was promoted. So I think we have to do a lot better at providing easy access to accurate information of where to start, what it's going to be like, and how to move forward.
Yeah, and I do think there's a piece like in that this is the way you answered it, and I would agree that it's sort of the same thing that we've gone through in organizations with respect to the anti-racist work, is that sometimes we know we need to do something, but we don't have the language to navigate it in a way that we're comfortable with, and that's where the fear holds us back, leaning into it, right?
In the one work environment, it's someone was trying to support me, say that I was mentally challenged. I said, no, that's not the word. You're mentally incapable. No, that's not it. You're mentally incompetent. No, that's not it. Like I said, the word is, I'm living with a mental illness. I think a lot of times we're trying to remove that mental illness term from the vocabulary. I'm totally against that.
Yeah.
I think we should be honest that, there's a continuum. Like we have mental wellness, which is where we all want to be, but we also have mental illness. And I think, like, don't make me ashamed that I actually am there. So like, I just think we need to be able to talk about it. So a lot of it is like, am I angry at the person for those terms? It's always the intent, right? What's the intent behind the conversation? The intent was someone was trying to connect with me and just not using the right terms at all, but that's because had never, dealt with it before.
Yeah.
So no, I got no anger. There was no need to be, anything with that person other than like, okay, like you really gotta get the right term.
Yeah.
So I think we also have to, be comfortable taking a chance and making a mistake,
Exactly.
and working with each other. I took a course on a program on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and one of the people they used as one of the best leaders to exemplify it was Howard Schultz with Starbucks. And the joke was that, but he's made so many mistakes. He's made so many gaffes, like in terms of his speeches, like how. But the comment from the professor was, but he tried.
Yeah.
And he learned from each time.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting approach. Like we almost look for perfection, which, none of us are going to be perfect. And the fact that I think you try and the intent is to do well, I think that's what matters most. And if you make a mistake, we all do. So appreciate it, support it, and going forward, let's not call me mentally challenged. Let's call me someone that's living with a mental illness. That's good. So
yeah.
It's like,
And that's progress. Yeah, it's so true. And I think, change and learning and evolution doesn't happen without discomfort. And I think we all have to just become more comfortable with getting uncomfortable because nothing's going to change otherwise, right?
no, and like this can sound glib too, but I do feel a lot of it like we just have to get over ourselves.
Yeah.
Like be open to have the conversations. Like what is the correct thing to say, not to say? Like I think let's have the conversation and we will learn along the way.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
to me is probably the best thing we can do.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think one of the things that I'm really enjoying with the work that we do in CMHA is, there's education that's what we're out doing, and as the more time I spend with the organization, the more I realize how powerful that is, because it does give people the words and the knowledge and the self-awareness to be able to navigate these things, so that we can actually create a healthier society more broadly, which is wonderful, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I saw Mara's comment there. I think one of the biggest things we need to do to also help leaders is that by having these conversations, we're not looking for you to fix
Yes. Yeah.
or provide the answer for them or be a therapist. We're just looking for these conversations to be had, to be natural, to be open. And I think a lot of leaders are hesitant to have these conversations, like language is right or not, and what are you expecting of me?
Yeah.
Like, are you expecting me to cure something or fix something? No, what we're expecting more than anything else is that we have a conversation, and that's it.
It's pretty simple. Right? Be human, make connection, have conversations.
One of the fundamental things we have as humans is we like to talk. Some of us, like me, more than others, but we all communicate, and that to me is always going to be the answer for us. If we communicate, we'll get through it.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us almost to the top of the hour, and I have a ton more things I want to talk to you about, but we'll have to save it for another time. So thank you for your beautiful heart, your authenticity, and just showing up. And it's so wonderful to be, in your presence and hearing these stories, because it does give us kind of permission and courage to do the same. So thank you for that, Michael.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm going to hand it back over to Tracy to wrap it up.
Thank you, guys. That was a very interesting and provocative topic, and that is near and dear to my heart, working with that work, and that, because mental health is just like physical health, and I'm a firm believer. If I have a broken leg, I'm going to go to the doctor. If I'm having an anxiety attack in that, I shouldn't have that stigma put on me in going to the doctor.
Exactly.
So, So, Karn and Michael, thank you so much for this important conversation today. And thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Please be sure to visit www.novascotia.cmha.ca and learn more about our at-work program.